On behalf of the Committee on Appropriations, I have the honor to sponsor the proposed appropriations for the special purpose funds under the fiscal year 2026 national budget. These funds, while often technical in nature, embody the weight of our government's responsibility to its people. They enable us to respond swiftly in times of crisis, extend fair and timely support to local governments, meet our obligations to workers, and sustain the national priorities that keep our economy and communities moving forward. They are, in short, instruments of stability and compassion, ensuring that government remains present and accountable, especially at the moments when our people need it most. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, for fiscal year 2026, we are proposing a total of 608.89 billion pesos for special purpose funds, or SPF. This represents 8.97% of the 6.79 trillion pesos total expenditure program. It is 81.995 billion pesos higher than the current year's level, or a 15.6% increase, underscoring our commitment to protect our people, meet our obligations, and sustain our country's growth momentum. Allow me to walk you through the details. First, the allocation to local government units, or ALGO, is proposed at 65.73 billion pesos. Of this, the Metro Manila Development Authority will receive 5.88 billion pesos. Net of MMDA, the ALGO stands at 59.85 billion pesos, lower by 7.96 billion pesos or 11.7% compared to 2025. As shares are adjusted in line with certified collections and formula-based entitlements. Next, the Local Government Support Fund, or the LGSF, is pegged at 16.08 billion pesos. This includes 5 billion pesos for financial assistance to LGUs, 8.08 billion pesos for the support to barangay development program of the NTF AKAP, 1 billion pesos each for the Growth Equity Fund, the Green program, and support and assistance to participatory budgeting. Meanwhile, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, BARM, is allocated 10.59 billion pesos. This amount includes 5 billion pesos for the Special Development Fund, now in its 7th year of a 10-year commitment to rehabilitate conflict-afflicted communities, and 5.59 billion pesos representing BARM's shares in national taxes, fees, charges as certified by the BIR. Second, the budgetary support to government corporations, or BSGC, is set at 149.65 billion pesos, a 17.4% increase. This provides expanded support to GOCCs delivering critical programs, including the restored subsidy for PhilHealth at 53.26 billion pesos to cover insurance premiums of indigent Filipinos. It also supports the National Electrification Administration, the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation, and the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation, among others. Third, the contingent fund is maintained at 13 billion pesos, the same level as in 2024 and 2025. This fund addresses unforeseen obligations, such as final and executory legal rulings or operational requirements of newly created offices. It is important to stress that this fund cannot be used for confidential or intelligence expenses of civilian agencies, nor for the purchase of motor vehicles. Fourth, the Miscellaneous Personal Benefits Fund, or MPBF, is proposed at 111.52 billion pesos, slightly higher than last year. This will provide for the performance-based bonus for fiscal year 2024, the filling of vacancies, subsistence allowances for uniformed personnel, additional healthcare benefits such as the 7,000 pesos annual medical allowance for civil servants, salary adjustments, and staffing modifications. These are not perks, but rather rightful benefits and lawful obligations to our public servants. Fifth, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, or the NDRRMF, is proposed at 31 billion pesos, an almost 48% increase. This allocation will strengthen pre-disaster measures, relief, and recovery efforts with 15.3 billion pesos for immediate aid and 14.7 billion pesos for the repair and reconstruction of permanent structures. An additional 1 billion pesos is earmarked for climate adaptation projects under the People's Survival Fund. For a country so often visited by typhoons, earthquakes, and other natural calamities, these resources are a necessity, not a choice. 6. The Pension and Gratuity Fund, or the PGF, is pegged at 197.99 billion pesos, an increase of 36.8%. This ensures that we meet our obligations to civilian and military retirees, covering pensions, retirement, and terminal leave benefits, and separation incentives. This also partly restores the cuts made by Congress in 2025, aligning appropriations with validated retiree lists and the pension requirements of military and uniformed personnel. Finally, the revised AFP Modernization Program, or the RAF-PMP, is proposed at 40 billion pesos, or 5 billion pesos higher than in 2025. This will allow us to continue modernizing the armed forces, acquiring and upgrading critical equipment and systems to keep our defense forces mission-ready and responsive. Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, at the heart of these special purpose funds lies a simple truth. They are not abstract numbers, but lifelines. They are guided by formulas where the law requires, but by certifications where revenues determine shares, and by prudence where flexibility is needed. Ultimately, they serve three purposes we all share. First, to protect our people, to empower our local communities, and to honor the commitments of government. With your support, we can ensure that our budget remains not only responsive and credible, but also worthy of the trust of the Filipino people, the trust that they have vested in us. Together, we can prepare our nation, not just for today's challenges, but for the future of the constituencies we serve. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, I respectfully move for the approval of fiscal year 2026 special purpose funds, and as we deliberate on these measures, or this measure rather, let us please be reminded that every peso we allocate is an investment in the trust of our people and in the future of our nation. With this, I yield the floor, ready to listen to the wisdom and questions of this august chamber, and hopeful that together we will chart a path that strengthens both our institutions and our people. Maraming salamat po.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to recognize Representative Chel of Akbayan Party List to interpolate the sponsor of the proposed budget of lump sum funds.
The Honorable Diokno is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening to the Chair of the Committee on Appropriations, the tireless Chair, and this distinguished sponsor, as well as the family of the Department of Budget and Management. I hope you don't mind, Madam Chair, if I ask some questions about the unprogrammed appropriations. First of all, as we understand that concept, the unprogrammed appropriations are really meant to be standby authority for certain funds na kung may dagdag na pondo mula sa loans, grants, o excess revenue, kalang sila mailalabas. These items aren't itemized. That's why they may be vulnerable to abuse and other issues involving what we heard from previous budgets. Ang una kong pong tanong, hindi ba't kaya mas makabubuti kung mag-program na lang ng transparent line items sa GAA para sa mga pangunahing serbisyo gaya ng edukasyon, kalusugan at rules-based social protection, imbis na ilagay sa unprogrammed appropriations? Kasi ang nakita po natin ay umaabot sa almost 250 billion ang UA sa ating 2026 proposed budget.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, we agree on the same. that it is better to have these items programmed and listed as separate line items on the budget.
I noticed that, for example, there are some items in the NEP or unprogrammed appropriations that are in the nature of social protection. For example, you have the strengthening assistance for government infrastructure and social programs, among others. At ang tanong ko po natin dito ay, because these are not line items put in the regular appropriations, in effect, the Executive Department through the DBM would have broad discretion to decide how this will be released. Would this not be transferred?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, there are certain items that would require really intervention in the middle of the year. For example, there are support to foreign assisted projects. May mga pagkakataon po na may mga commitments tayo na bigla natin kailangang ipasok. So maganda po na meron din po tayong paghuhugutan para doon. Yun po yung mga tinatawag natin na mga FAPs. There are instances also where you would have to provide additional budgetary support to GOCCs. So while we do recognize that generally mas maganda po talaga kapag naka-line item po lahat at naka-program, there are certain instances wherein we would need to pull from unprogrammed funds in order to immediately respond to needs as they arise.
I noticed, Madam Sponsor, that some of the items put in the unprogrammed appropriations appear to be big-ticket, pre-planned programs. Aside from what I mentioned earlier, you have as well the 97 billion for foreign assisted projects, 6.7 billion for health emergency allowances, and the earlier mentioned strengthening assistance for government infrastructure and social programs. They would appear to me to be clearly programmed obligations that should be under a regular budget rather than put in the unprogrammed appropriations.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, with regards to FAPs in particular, if we may use that as an example. So in the current NEP, there's about 97 billion on program. So as per the DBM, the reason why ideally we would want to put FAPs in as specific line items of either mostly under the DPWH or DOTR, as that would be the ideal situation. However, there are instances wherein a particular FAPs project has been approved by the ICC. It's the Infrastructure Coordinating Council, Investment Coordination Committee. And as much as that would the DBM would want to include that as a separate line item, it no longer made the cutoff. There's a cutoff date po kasi by which the EDC, the Economic Development Council, would need to approve a particular FAPS program for it to make it into the NEP as a separate line item. So while we recognize that ideally we would want most of the appropriations to be put in as programmed projects, separate FAPs, there are instances wherein we would need to put some into the unprogrammed appropriations. But rest assured, on the part of the DBM and on the part of the Committee on Appropriations, when we have these unprogrammed appropriations, we will put in the necessary safeguards in order to ensure that these are utilized for specific purposes that are really necessary.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Those safeguards, I think, are very, very vital. Going back to the strengthening assistance for government infrastructure and social programs, the amount of 80 billion more or less. Para saan po ba itong programang ito. Since there are already infrastructure and social programs in our regular budget, saan po mapupunta itong 80 billion na napakalaking halaga?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the strengthening assistance for government infrastructure and social programs, as of now, the 80 billion that is there in the NEP would be readied for the purpose of disbursement for the following infrastructure projects and social programs such as, but not limited to, construction, restoration, or improvement of roads, bridges, farm-to-market roads, buildings and flood control projects, electrification projects, agriculture-related programs and projects, and financial assistance to indigent individuals or families. Such purpose covers urgent and high-priority social protection programs, social services, and infrastructure projects which require national government support. So only for those, these purposes primarily, but not limited to the aforementioned purposes.
Kung yun po ang mga pupuntahan yan, bakit hindi na lang natin ilagay sa line items under the program appropriations?
Mr. Speaker, again, I agree with my distinguished colleague that as much as possible, we would want to put as much of the social protection programs in as a separate line item. However, there have been instances in the past, and it actually happens on a yearly basis, that there are certain programs that would need to be triggered that were not initially planned for. For example, the health emergency allowance during the time of COVID, it was an unanticipated event that was not funded for or prepared for in the GAA for that year. So dun po natin kinuha yan sa SAGIP. Also, there are instances wherein the AICS, the funds for AICS has been depleted for the year, and then towards the end of the year, bigla pong may malaking kalamidad na kailangan pong respondehan. So those are extraordinary circumstances wherein we would need to access the SAGIP fund in order to add more towards the social protection programs already provided for in the GAA, a separate line item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since I only have a very short time left, I just have one last question and one request from the department. Kahapon po sa meeting ng Committee on Dangerous Drugs, lumabas na the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act has a provision that was passed way back in 2002 that abolished all the anti-drug, illegal drug units in the PNP, NBI, and the customs and ordered their transfer and absorption to the PDEA. Pero 23 taon na po at hindi pa rin na-implement yung batas na yan. May I know if the DBM has any development plan for making sure that this will become a reality?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues, I will quickly confer po with DBM on this. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, upon conferring with the DBM, we are aware po of the particular provision in that law which requires the transfer of the rehabilitation centers previously lodged under the Dangerous Drugs Board to the DOH. But may we respectfully request po my distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker, to please read out the provision po
I
and
was-
what would need to be transferred
Thank
to
you,
the...
Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair. I wasn't referring to the rehabilitation centers. I was referring to the abolition of the anti-illegal drug units under Section 86 of RA 9165 and their transfer to the PIDEA. The contemplation of the comprehensive drugs law was really to make the PIDEA the central arm for all anti-illegal drug operations. That was way back in 2002. Pero hanggang ngayon po ay nandun pa yung mga PNP anti-drug units at iba pang mga law enforcement. Hindi na naging reality yung utos ng Kongreso na ilipat sa PIDEA yon. But I would understand if you don't have the data now, but I would request, because this was an issue that came up in Committee on Dangerous Drugs yesterday, that we be provided. Ang sabi po ng PIDEA, hindi nila ma-absorb dahil kulang sila ng plantilla at kulang din sila ng budget for the PIDEA Academy, among other reasons.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, as of now, there is no pending request from PIDEA for the creation of these new plantilla positions. We are grateful to our distinguished colleague for bringing that up. So the DBM commits to reach out to the PIDEA to ask them about the status of the creation of these offices under PIDEA. And as soon as PIDEA is ready to provide the programming, particularly with regard to how many additional plantilla positions they would need, the DBM commits to immediately fund that. Kung aabot po ngayong taon, the DBM commits to pull that from the MPBF of 2025. Kung hindi naman po, ipapasok po natin sa MPBF ng 2026. So, we're grateful to our distinguished colleague for bringing that up kasi as of now po, wala daw pong request yung PIDEA for the creation of these new plantilla
Thank you.
positions.
I'm sure PIDEA would be happy. One last, Mr. Speaker, if I may, very short. Kayo po mismo, Madam Chair, in one of the interviews previously, mentioned that about 141 billion ang nailabas noong 2023 at 2024 unprogrammed appropriations for flood control projects. I will not go deeply into this. I know this was before your time. Ang tanong ko lang po sa department ay, handa po ba ang DBM na isubmit sa Kongreso ang kompletong listahan ng lahat ng proyekto na napondohan mula sa unprogrammed appropriations? Kasama na rin po ang SARO at ang mga revenue certifications mula sa Treasury so that we can be assured of where that money went, kung saan po napunta yung pera.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, as per our commitment during the first day po of the plenary deliberations, that was a request po from several of our distinguished colleagues to provide the detailed breakdown of the list of projects released from unprogrammed appropriations. So that list has been provided to several of our colleagues, and we will be sharing the same po to our distinguished colleague with all the details. And on the part of the DBM po, the next step actually is we are actually already closely coordinating with the DPWH to provide the status of the status of completion of these projects. I think that is the visibility that we need po at this point in time, because on the part of the DBM, they have visibility as to which projects have been released, kung alin na po yung may saro. But as to the actual status of the completion of these projects released under unprogrammed appropriations, kasalukuyan pong hinihingi ng DBM yun sa DPWH. So as soon as we have that information, the DBM would also be very happy to share the same to our distinguished colleague.
Thank you so much, Madam Distinguished Sponsor. And Mr. Speaker, may I just say that I am really kudos and saludo po sa inyo sa lahat ng ginagawa niyong trabaho para sa budget. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much po. I am honored and grateful po for the recognition from the Honorable Chel Diokno. Maraming salamat po. Before I end lang po, there was one question lang po from our distinguished colleague that I was not able to address. This pertains po to the status of the PIDEA Academy. Upon conferring po with the DBM, that has also not been raised by the DBM, but the same way po, with regard to the creation of the plantilla positions, we will also revert to PIDEA on this and update our distinguished colleague on the status of the same. Maraming salamat po.